Have you ever stopped to wonder why you pay taxes to like 3 different governments? Or how the state right next door can have totally different laws? Well, today we're diving into the system that basically runs the entire United States. It's called federalism. So let's get into it and figure out who's really in charge. Right from the very beginning, the guys who founded the country, people like James Madison, had a really specific idea in mind. They knew they needed a strong central government, but they were also, terrified of putting too much power in one place. This quote, it gets right to the heart of their solution, a balance of power, where the federal government's job is limited and specific, leaving pretty much everything else to the states. Okay, so that's a cool idea from history, but what does it actually mean for you, like today? Well, it turns out this whole division of power thing affects almost everything. The roads you drive on, the schools your kids go to, even the process for getting your driver's license. It's basically a constant negotiation over who gets to make the rules. To really get this, you gotta stop thinking of the government as just one big thing. Instead, picture it as different layers, almost like a cake, each with its own job, and they're all operating at the exact same time. And this whole system has a name, of course, federalism. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like the official rulebook for the government. It's the core agreement that lays out who gets to do what, creating a kind of partnership between the national government and all the individual state governments. So this system basically breaks down into 3 main layers. At the very top, you've got the federal government. Their laws are called acts, and they apply to, well, everyone in the entire country. Then, one step down, you have state governments. They pass statutes, which everyone in that particular state has to follow. And finally, at the ground level, you have your local government, passing ordinances for just your city or your county. 3 layers, 3 kinds of laws.
All right, let's start at the top of the food chain. We're talking about the federal government, the one that makes rules for the whole nation.
So there are some things only the federal government is allowed to do. These are its exclusive, or delegated powers, written right into the Constitution. And it makes sense, right? You wouldn't want the state of Ohio to start printing its own money or Texas to declare war on another country. These are the big picture jobs for the entire nation.
And you see this federal power pop up in a really big way during emergencies. When a monster storm, like Superstorm Sandy hits, that's a national problem. And that's when a federal agency like FEMA steps in, bringing massive resources for relief that a single state just couldn't handle on its own.
Okay, so that's the feds. Now let's drop down a level. The Constitution didn't just give out powers, it also made sure to fence off, or reserve, a whole bunch of other powers just for the states to handle. And this is where government starts to feel a lot more personal. States are the ones who decide the curriculum for public schools, how elections are run, and what you need to do to get a license to be a doctor or a plumber. This is exactly why all those rules can be so different from one state to the next. And these powers are still super relevant. I mean, the Founding Fathers obviously weren't thinking about cyberbullying, but that power to control education, it allows a state like Florida to pass its own specific law, a state statute, to tackle this very modern problem in its own schools. And get this, states don't just have their own powers. They have their own entire rule books, their own constitutions. And just look at the difference in changing the rules. To amend the US Constitution, you need this massive supermajority in Congress, plus 3/4 of all the states to agree. It's a huge deal. But in Florida, citizens can get an amendment on the ballot and it passes with a 60% vote. It just goes to show how much more flexible states can be. All right, let's zoom all the way in now. We're talking about the government that affects your daily life more than any other, your local government. Yeah, we're talking about the really local stuff, the things you probably deal with every single day without even thinking about it. Your town or county government is setting the speed limit on your street, deciding where your kid's bus stop is, and maybe most importantly, making sure the garbage truck shows up every week. And here it is, maybe the most perfect, real-world example of local power you can imagine. Ever gotten a little notice on your door that your trash day is moving from Wednesday to Thursday? That's it. That's your local government in action. It's not glamorous, but it is a crystal clear example of how government shapes your weekly routine. Okay, so we've got federal powers, state powers, and local powers. Simple, right? Well, not exactly. What about the areas where they all overlap? That brings us to the final, and maybe most confusing piece of the puzzle.
These are what we call concurrent powers. Concurrent just means happening at the same time. So these are things that both the federal government and the state governments can do simultaneously. They can both set up courts, they can both enforce laws, and, everyone's favorite, they can both collect taxes.
And the absolute best example of this, the one we all feel,
is taxes. Just think about it. You pay federal income tax to fund things like the military. You pay a state sales tax that helps pay for state roads. And you pay local property taxes that fund your neighborhood schools and fire department. All three layers are taxing you at the same time to pay for different stuff.
So, with all these laws flying around, what happens when they clash? What if a state law says one thing and a federal law says the exact opposite? Well, the Constitution has a built-in tiebreaker. It's called the Supremacy Clause, and it creates a really clear pecking order. The U.S. Constitution is the absolute supreme law of the land, period. Below that, federal laws beat state laws, and state laws beat local laws. Simple as that.
And all this brings us to one last, really big question. This system, this whole idea of federalism, it was designed over 200 years ago for a small country of farmers. So here's something to chew on. In our crazy, modern, super-connected world, is this old-school division of power still the best way to run the country? Is it still working for us? That's something we're thinking about.